Let's set aside the world's hustle and bustle for a moment and relax with the glow of a good story. The one I'll tell you today is about a mother-in-law who prepared lunch for her daughter-in-law every day. One day, not liking the taste, she gave it to a dog, which immediately collapsed, foaming at the mouth. At that moment, drenched in cold sweat, I decided to fight back. A truly spectacular ending awaits you. Helen, what time is it? Haven't you gotten up yet? David is already getting ready for work. And you're just lounging around. My mother-in-law's sharp voice cut through the bedroom door like a dagger. I opened my eyes abruptly. I grabbed my phone to check the time. It was only 6:30 a.m. The report I had finished at 2 a.m. after a long night of overtime was still in my bag. I felt a throb in my temples. "Yes, Mrs. Beatrice. I'm up," I replied, suppressing the anger rising in my throat, but I was surprised by my own hoarse, rough voice. I dragged my exhausted body to the shower, and when I emerged, my mother-in-law, Mrs. Beatrice, was already seated, rigid, at the dining room table, the familiar reddish Tupperware in front of her. At 70 years old, she kept her back straight and her gray hair in an impeccable bun. Yet, from behind her glasses, her gaze shimmered in a strange way. "I prepared today's lunch since 5 a.m. I know you're tired from all the overtime, so you need to eat well." She adjusted her glasses and offered an indecipherable smile. Just seeing the Tupperware sent a wave of nausea through me. For 3 years of my marriage, my mother-in-law had prepared my lunch without fail every single day. The menu changed daily, but was always imbued with the same strange herbal smell. My husband, David, always said it was because his mother's family had a background in herbal remedies, and she liked to prepare invigorating meals, but something unsettled me. "Thank you, Mrs. Beatrice," I said with a forced smile, as I put the container into my bag. As I touched the Tupperware, I felt my mother-in-law's gaze glued to my hand like a spiderweb. "Make sure you eat it all, understand?" Her voice, suddenly soft, sent a shiver down my spine. "How do you expect to give me a grandchild, to continue the family name, if you're so thin and pale?" I squeezed my spoon so hard my knuckles turned white. The same old song again. Ever since I had told her clearly a year ago that I wasn't planning on having children at the moment, my mother-in-law looked at me with disapproval. "And David?" I asked, stirring a bland oatmeal. "He left on a business trip last night," she grumbled. "My son works tirelessly. And you, always with the excuse of overtime. Who knows if it's true or not?" I felt a pang in my heart. It was his 3rd business trip that month alone. Yet, recently, I had seen a photo on David's social media where a woman's hand, with intensely red-painted nails, rested on his shoulder. When I asked him who it was, he simply said it was a client. I barely took 2 spoonfuls of the oatmeal. I grabbed my bag and left the house as if I were fleeing. As I closed the door, I thought I heard my mother-in-law humming a strangely cheerful tune. At lunchtime, I stared at the Tupperware on my desk, a pork cheek stew with a greasy sheen and unnaturally green vegetables. As I brought a piece to my mouth, the familiar bitter taste invaded me. I rushed to the restroom and vomited everything. "Looks like your mother-in-law's loving lunch didn't sit well with you today either," my colleague Claire said sarcastically, leaning against the restroom door. "My stomach just doesn't feel very good," I said, wiping my mouth and forcing a smile. "Honestly, Helen, your mother-in-law is incredible. Preparing lunch for her daughter-in-law for 3 years, without missing a single day," Claire winked and continued. "By the way, there have been some rumors about your husband lately." "What rumors?" I abruptly raised my head. Claire made a gesture as if zipping her mouth shut. "No, nothing. I must have seen wrong." I returned to my desk and put the Tupperware at the bottom of a drawer. My mind was in a whirl. Claire lived in my same apartment complex. What on earth could she have seen? The lunch, almost untouched, remained in the drawer until it was time to leave. As I walked out of the building and felt the cold wind, I made a decision. Rusty, a stray dog that lived behind my building, was always happy when I gave him something to eat. Today, I was going to give him a special feast, mentally asking my mother-in-law for forgiveness. I poured half the contents of the Tupperware into his bowl. "Here, Rusty, eat up. Today's a special day." I stroked his head, and he, wagging his tail enthusiastically, began to devour the food. I had barely taken a few steps when I heard a piercing yelp behind me. I turned and froze. Rusty lay on the ground, convulsing violently. White foam ceaselessly poured from his mouth, and his paws had stiffened as if he'd suffered an electric shock. "Rusty!" I ran towards him, but the scene paralyzed me. In a matter of seconds, the dog, once healthy and full of life, stopped moving. His eyes were open, but lifeless. My hands trembled so much I could barely hold my bag, and a cold sweat instantly drenched my back. This image was terribly familiar to me. It was identical to a poisoning victim I had seen on the news last week. A shiver ran from my head to my toes. With trembling hands, I took out my phone and called Hugh, a college friend who worked as a researcher at a pharmaceutical company. "Hugh, I need your help. It's very urgent." My voice trembled as quickly as possible. After hanging up, I carefully collected the leftover lunch in a plastic bag. I looked at Rusty's lifeless body, and my eyes filled with tears. This was by no means an accident. When I got home, my mother-in-law was watching television in the living room, very calmly. She didn't even turn when she heard me come in. "Did you eat all your lunch?" she asked. "Yes, Mrs. Beatrice. It was delicious. Thank you very much." I was surprised by the calmness of my own voice. I dug my nails into my palms, but I felt no pain. If the analysis results confirmed my suspicions, this was not something that could be resolved with a simple divorce. That night, I had a horrible nightmare. In my dream, my mother-in-law stood beside my bed, holding the pink Tupperware and smiling. "The next lunch, you must eat it all." I woke up with a start, drenched in sweat. David's side of the bed was empty. Again, spending the night out. At that moment, my phone screen lit up. It was an urgent message from Hugh. "We must meet tomorrow morning, without fail. And for nothing in the world, should you eat or drink anything your mother-in-law gives you." I stared at the empty ceiling, and for the first time understood everything with terrifying clarity. This was not a simple family conflict. It was a murder plot. "Are you absolutely sure?" I squeezed my coffee cup so hard, my knuckles turned white. My friend Hugh adjusted his glasses and pushed the lab report back towards me. "It's an organophosphate pesticide. With this amount, you could take down a bull." "Helen, your mother-in-law is trying to kill you." The cafe noise suddenly faded. As I looked at the technical terms and data in the report, I remembered the image of Rusty foaming at the mouth. That should have been me. "Report it to the police. It's a clear attempt at murder," Hugh whispered. I shook my head, folded the report, and put it in my bag. Not yet. The sun coming through the window hit the back of my hand, but I felt no warmth. The loving lunch my mother-in-law had so meticulously prepared for over half a year was, in reality, a slow poison. I remembered the strange glint in her eyes behind her glasses. It wasn't concern, it was anticipation. "What do you plan to do then?" Hugh asked, worried. I raised my head and forced a smile that I didn't even recognize myself. "First, I need to find out who else wants me dead." As I left the cafe, I called a private investigator directly. Mr. Morris was the same person I had contacted 6 months ago when I suspected David was cheating on me. Now, finally, he would be truly useful. "Mr. Morris, I need you to investigate all of David Miller's movements for the last 3 months, as quickly as possible." After hanging up, I stopped at an intersection and looked at the enormous advertising billboard for a shopping mall across the street. It was a cosmetic ad I had directed myself. The imaginary model thought that the person who created that campaign was now at a crossroads between life and death. I arrived home. It was past 10 p.m. As I opened the door, my mother-in-law was watching television in the living room. She didn't even turn her head when she heard me. "Why so late?" "Dinner's cold." "I had to work late," I replied in a low voice, glancing at the table. There was only one plate and one set of cutlery. David hadn't come home. "David called. He says he can't come this week because of a project. A man has to focus on his work. He can't be a burden on him." My mother-in-law's tone was forcibly indifferent, but something wasn't right. I suppressed my nausea, nodded. and locked myself in my room. I locked the door, took the lab report out of my bag, and read it one more time. Each number was a stab in the heart. I turned on my computer. I had an email from Detective Morris. The attached file contained a record of David's movements and dozens of photos. I started clicking through them, one by one, feeling as if an invisible hand was crushing my heart. In the photos, David walked arm in arm with a young woman through luxury restaurants, hotel lobbies, and department stores. But the image that hurt me the most was the last one. They were kissing at the entrance of an apartment complex. The setting was, surprisingly, the Sterling residences, right across from our house. Business trip, I scoffed disdainfully. His supposed business trip consisted of enjoying his future with his mistress in the building across the street. I zoomed in on the photo to get a better look at the woman's face. She looked about 25 or 26, with long, straight hair, and was dressed in luxury brands from head to toe. The Cartier bracelet she wore on her wrist was the same one I had seen on David's credit card statement last month. On the last page was the detective's report. Iris Sterling, 28 years old, only daughter of the CEO of Sterling Group. Relationship with David Miller for at least 8 months. They often cohabitate during David's business trips. Then my cursor stopped on a line. According to the building doorman's testimony, David's mother, Beatrice Miller, visits the address frequently and maintains a very close relationship with Iris Sterling. My blood ran cold. My mother-in-law knew, and not only knew, but went to visit her. I clung to the desk to keep from falling. This wasn't a simple infidelity. It was a methodical plan to replace me. With trembling hands, I opened the last attached file. David's bank statements. Over the last 6 months, he had transferred $3,000 monthly to an account under the concept of project collaboration. The holder of that account was, of course, Iris Sterling. I slumped into my chair. My mind raced. My mother-in-law was poisoning me daily. My husband was cheating on me with another woman, and to top it all off, they were both spending our money. Everything pointed to a single, terrible conclusion. They wanted to eliminate me from this world. The next day was Saturday. My mother-in-law left early, saying she was going to a course at the senior center. As soon as she left, I entered her room. The room was impeccably clean. Every object was in its place, with millimeter precision. I put on gloves and began to carefully search the room. The drawers contained perfectly folded underwear. The closet, clothes arranged by color. Then, as I lifted the mattress, a black notebook fell out. I opened the first page and held my breath. Helen's diet log, the 10th of January 2019. As I flipped through the pages, I found detailed notes on how I had eaten lunch each day. March 12. Ate half. Said the taste was strange. Next time, reduce the bitterness. April 5. Ate everything. No effect. May 20. Seems she threw it away. Must increase the dose. The most recent entry was from 3 days ago. June 10. A dog ate it and died. I think she suspects. Must find another method. I bit my lip to keep from screaming. It wasn't a diary. It was a murder log. I continued to flip, and the content became even more explicit. What a wonderful girl. That's Iris. From a good family, good education, she would be a great help to my David's business. And Helen just takes up space, doesn't want children, and is always complaining about work. Today, Iris gave David a watch worth over $20,000. Yes, this is class. David told me Iris's father promised him the position of vice president of Sterling Group as soon as he divorces. That was our plan. My hands trembled so much I could barely hold the notebook. So that was it. David wanted to advance his career, and my mother-in-law wanted a rich daughter-in-law. And I was the obstacle in their way, an obstacle that had to be eliminated. I quickly photographed all the pages with my phone and put the notebook back in its place. As I was leaving the room, I saw a pill bottle on the nightstand. I picked it up, pralidoxime, the specific antidote for organophosphate pesticide poisoning. How thoughtful, I thought with a chilling smile. She even has the antidote prepared. I photographed the bottle as well. I went back to my room and sat on the bed. My mind raced. Reporting them to the police was the easiest solution. Divorce was what they wanted. I would make them pay for their crimes, but not yet. At that moment, the phone rang. It was my colleague Claire. Helen, sorry to bother you on the weekend. An urgent last-minute meeting came up with a client. Can you come? They're from the Sterling Group. They say the daughter herself is coming. I got up. Iris Sterling? Wow, how do you know? Yes, that's her. They say she just returned from abroad and is starting to train in company management. I dug my nails into my palm. I'm on my way right now. In the company's meeting room, I saw Iris in person for the first time. She was much more dazzling than in the photos, covered in luxury brands. Every gesture exuded that typical arrogance of rich girls. Seeing me enter, she raised an eyebrow. Helen, our team's creative director, Claire introduced me. Iris's gaze shifted for an instant. She quickly regained her composure, but her moment of surprise and disorientation did not escape me. I've heard a lot about you, she said, extending her hand. The Cartier bracelet gleamed. Instead of shaking her hand, I stared at the bracelet and said, "It's a new model, isn't it? Must have cost a fortune." For an instant, she instinctively withdrew her hand. It was a gift from a friend. "Your boyfriend?" I asked with a smile, watching her pupils dilate. The meeting proceeded smoothly, with the exception of the inquisitive glances Iris kept throwing my way. At the end, Claire stopped me. "What's wrong with you today? You were too aggressive with the client." "That woman is my husband's mistress," I said calmly. Claire's eyes widened in shock. "What? Wait a minute. So, that woman is..." I sensed her hesitation again. "What were you going to tell me that you didn't finish? You saw her, didn't you?" Claire bit her lip. "Last month, I went to my cousin's house, who lives in the Sterling residences, and I saw David with a woman. I didn't want to tell you to spare your feelings. Next time something like that happens, tell me right away. And if you know anything else about Iris, tell me." As I left the building, the sun blinded me. The board was set, and the pieces were in place. A mother-in-law trying to poison me, a husband wanting to abandon me, and a mistress intending to take my place. Perfect. Now it was my turn. I installed a miniature camera, the size of a button, in a corner of the kitchen cabinet with a frontal view of the countertop. From that angle, I could perfectly record the entire lunch preparation process. "Helen," my mother-in-law's voice behind me startled me so much I almost dropped the screwdriver. But as I turned, I had already composed an expression of indifference. I was looking for some honey. My throat is irritated. My mother-in-law scrutinized the kitchen suspiciously. Her gaze lingered for a second on the top of the cabinet, and my heart pounded. "The honey is on the second shelf to the left," I said. Finally, before she turned and left, I let out a sigh of relief and quickly finished the installation. The camera was connected to my phone, allowing me to see images in real time and record automatically. I would see with my own eyes what special condiment my mother-in-law added to my lunch every day. I returned to my room, locked the door, and opened the surveillance app on my phone. The image was clear. My mother-in-law was cutting vegetables with a dexterity that seemed straight out of a cooking show. Although her back was to the camera, I clearly saw her pull a small vial from her pocket. She poured something into the stew and stirred it. "Got you," I murmured, pressing the record button. The next morning at the table, my mother-in-law handed me the pink Tupperware, as usual. Today I made meatballs with sauce. I took the Tupperware with a wide smile. "Mrs. Beatrice, you are so good to me. My colleagues at work say I'm very lucky with my mother-in-law. They're jealous. Could you prepare a little more? I'd like them to taste it." My mother-in-law's expression stiffened for a moment. Behind her glasses, I saw a glimpse of panic. "This I made especially for you. Maybe others won't like it." "Oh, come on. I'll just give some to Claire and one or two others. They're all eager to learn your recipes." Seeing my innocent smile, the corner of my mother-in-law's lips trembled. Another day. Today I didn't make much. I feigned disappointment and sighed. But inside, I smiled coldly. "Of course, you can't let others taste it, can you?" Before leaving for work, I said loudly, "Mrs. Beatrice, I think I'll have to stay late today. Don't wait for me for dinner." As soon as I closed the door, I checked the camera on my phone, just as I expected. As soon as I left, My mother-in-law returned to the kitchen, took a small paper packet from the back of the refrigerator, and poured a white powder into another Tupperware. I had the evidence. I took a screenshot and sent it to Detective Morris. Analyze what this chemical product is. In the office restroom, I poured today's lunch down the toilet and flushed. As I watched the food disappear down the drain, a daring idea crossed my mind. What if I made my mother-in-law taste her own special recipe? At lunchtime, I sent her a message. Mrs. Beatrice, something urgent came up at work, and I won't be able to come for dinner. Don't wait for me. Please, eat first. Then, with the camera activated, I waited in silence. At 6 p.m., my mother-in-law entered the kitchen, looked at the Tupperware that was originally for me, hesitated for a moment, and then dumped everything into the organic trash bin. Clever. I bit my lip. She wasn't going to fall into the trap so easily. I decided to change my strategy. The next morning, I got up earlier than usual, and before my mother-in-law woke up, I swapped the 2 Tupperware containers. Baked salmon with dill sauce. Eat it before it gets cold, she said, unsuspecting, as she handed me my lunch. Thank you, Mrs. Beatrice. I smiled brightly as I took it. Inside that container was the food she had prepared for herself, and the poisoned Tupperware for me was now on her own table. Throughout the day, I checked the camera every hour. At 3 p.m., finally, there was movement. My mother-in-law opened her Tupperware and began to eat. Halfway through, she suddenly clutched her stomach, and her face turned as pale as wax. I held my breath as I watched her stumble and run to the restroom. Minutes later, she emerged, exhausted, pulled the pralidoxime bottle from a drawer, and swallowed 2 pills. Those who sow the wind reap the whirlwind. I smiled coldly, but at the same time felt a shiver. If I had truly eaten that lunch that day, what would have become of me? It's an organophosphate insecticide. What your mother-in-law uses is a modified version, less toxic but harder to detect. In the long term, it causes multi-organ failure that can look like natural death. Detective Morris's voice sounded grave on the other end of the phone. I squeezed my phone tightly. Is it possible to know where she got it? It's an experimental chemical product to which only pharmaceutical employees have access. It turns out your mother-in-law has a cousin who is a development manager at Astra Labs. So, that was it, a family crime. I thanked the detective and called my lawyer. Helen, with the evidence you've provided, this is a clear attempt at homicide, the lawyer said, adjusting his glasses. But if we report it to the police now, they might destroy the evidence. It's best if you gather more evidence while protecting yourself. And what about the assets? I asked. Most concerned. The apartment you bought after marrying is communal property. But, the lawyer hesitated. According to bank statements, your husband withdrew approximately 80% of the funds from the joint account in the last 6 months and transferred them elsewhere. Suddenly, everything went black. How much? About $240,000. I bit my lip to keep from screaming. $240,000. It was the money David and I had saved together. Most of it came from my bonuses and overtime. Can I get it back? My voice trembled. We need more proof that this is a malicious concealment of assets. If, in the divorce proceedings, we can prove the other party's fault, you will have an advantage in the asset division. As I left the lawyer's office, the sun hurt my eyes. I stood in the street, not knowing where to go. My home had become a poisoned den, and at the office, Iris awaited me with a mocking smile. At that moment, the phone rang. It was David. I took a deep breath and answered. Hello, Helen darling, I'll be back tomorrow. I have good news for you. His voice sounded strangely euphoric. What good news? I forced myself to speak normally. I'll tell you when we see each other. Oh, and how is my mother? Is she okay? I looked at the happy family portrait on a billboard across the street and smiled. Yes, she's very well. Yesterday she complained of a stomachache, but she took some pills, and she's already better. There was a silence of several seconds on the other end of the line. What pills? Well, I think she said they were called pralidoxime. She said it was for her stomach. A longer silence. Then David hastily said goodbye and hung up. I burst out laughing in the middle of the street. He knew too. He was an accomplice. Mother and son were, in fact, two demons made for each other. David returned earlier than expected. When I arrived home from work, he was already in the living room, talking seriously with his mother. As soon as I entered, they both fell silent strangely. "I'm home," I said, pretending not to notice anything as I put down my bag. The project finished earlier than expected. David approached and gave me a formal hug. He smelled of an unknown perfume, the same one Iris used. Behind him, my mother-in-law, still pale, cast a penetrating glance at me. "David has something to tell you? What good news is it?" I asked with a smile, though I already guessed everything. David cleared his throat. "I think I'm getting a promotion. The company plans to appoint me director of the Singapore headquarters." "Congratulations," I said, smiling. But my nails dug into my palms. "I think I'll be there for at least 3 years." "It's a fantastic opportunity," he said, avoiding my gaze. 3 years. Enough time for me to die in an accident, and for him to remarry. I looked at my mother-in-law. A faint smile played on her lips. "I'm very happy," I said, my own voice sounding strange. "It's next month. There's a lot to prepare." David seemed relieved by my unexpectedly calm reaction. "Okay, don't worry about anything. I'll take care of the house." During dinner, I served soup to my mother-in-law. "Mrs. Beatrice, you haven't looked well lately. Eat lots of soup." She looked at me with suspicion, alternating her gaze between my face and the bowl before accepting it. David, beside her, watched the scene nervously. "Oh, by the way," I said, as if nothing was amiss. "There's an audit at the company lately, and my profit bonus will be delayed. How much money is left in our joint account? I want to buy a handbag." David's spoon paused in midair, and my mother-in-law's spoon fell into her soup bowl with a clink. "There should be about $30,000 or $40,000 left," David said, regaining his composure. "Why a handbag all of a sudden?" "It's just that all my colleagues bought the new model. Claire's Dior costs over $3,000, I pouted. David and Beatrice exchanged a look. "Well, buy it. You know the password, right?" He forced a smile. "Of course I do. It's our wedding anniversary," I thought. But tragically, there wasn't even $3,000 left in that account, not even $300. That night, David fell asleep almost immediately, using jet lag as an excuse, without even touching me. In the darkness, as I listened to his snoring, I plunged into my thoughts. Singapore. He probably planned to go with Iris and start a new life there, and I would die in some kind of accident. I silently got up and took an envelope from the back of the closet. Inside were the proofs that would save my life: camera captures, lab reports, bank statements. But it wasn't enough. I needed a more perfect plan. I looked at David sleeping and remembered my lawyer's words: "If in the divorce process we can prove the fault of the other party." An audacious idea came to my mind. If they wanted to play this game, I was willing to play a big one. The second proposal meeting with Sterling Group starts at 10. "Iris is leading the team in person," Claire whispered, placing a cup of coffee on my desk. "She specifically requested you be present." My hand, stirring the coffee, stopped. Ever since I learned that Iris was David's mistress, I had avoided a direct confrontation, but I couldn't keep running anymore. "Pass me all the related documentation," I said. My voice sounded surprisingly calm. "Are you okay?" "You look terrible," Claire said, handing me the folder. I touched my cheek. The night before, I had barely slept, between David's movements and the sound of my mother-in-law taking pills. "I'm fine." "What project is the Sterling Group working on?" "A new cosmetics brand. The budget is $20 million. Rumors say Iris wants to use this project to prove her worth and officially inherit the management." I smiled with disdain. Steal my project with my husband's money to, with that merit, get my husband. The situation was one of sublime irony. As I entered the meeting room, Iris was preparing her presentation in front of the projector. She wore a beige suit that gave her a very elegant look. The Cartier bracelet on her wrist gleamed under the lights. "Director Helen, you're here," she said with a business smile, but her gaze was icy. I nodded and sat in the seat furthest from her. When the meeting began, Iris presented her vision for the new brand without hesitation. From time to time, she mixed in English words, which came off as quite pretentious. "We want to build a high-end brand image. Modern and unique," she said, sweeping her gaze around the room and briefly fixing in on me. "Our target audience is elite urban women between 25 and 35 years old." I pretended to take notes, lowering my head. In reality, I was drawing 3 circles, a habit I had to organize my ideas. Iris's proposal was flashy but vague, based on castles in the air rather than market studies. "Director Helen, do you have any suggestions?" she suddenly interjected. Her voice was sweet, but with a sharp undertone. All eyes turned to me. I slowly closed my notebook and forced a professional smile. "Miss Sterling's vision is very creative, but..." I paused deliberately, and Iris's brow furrowed slightly. "According to our latest market study, women aged 25 to 35 are more interested in ingredient safety and product efficacy than in packaging or concept." I turned on my tablet and projected the data onto the screen. These are last month's data. In purchasing decision factors, safety and efficacy represent 47% and 39%, respectively, while packaging represents only 14%. Silence fell in the room. Iris's smile froze on her face. Furthermore, I continued in a serene voice, "The uniqueness Miss Sterling mentions clashes with Sterling Group's traditional and conservative image. An abrupt shift to a niche market could mean losing current clientele." Iris's nails tapped irregularly on the table. I noticed the ring she wore on the ring finger of her left hand. It wasn't a wedding ring, but its placement was very ambiguous. "Director Helen, you are the professional," she said with a forced smile. "But innovation always carries risks, don't you think? Intelligent innovation is based on data, but blind risk only leads to failure," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. The atmosphere in the room froze. Claire nudged my foot under the table. It was then that I realized my tone had been too sharp. "Of course, this is just an initial proposal. We can provide you with a more detailed market analysis." I hastened to diffuse the situation. Iris nodded and quickly changed the subject. At the end of the meeting, she called me. "Director Helen, can we talk for a moment alone?" We entered a small, empty meeting room. As soon as the door closed, her business smile disappeared. "I know who you are, David's wife," she said bluntly. I leaned against the table, crossing my arms, and countered, "I also know who you are. The mistress who destroys families." Iris's face instantly flushed. The Cartier bracelet jingled with her abrupt movements. "We truly love each other. Your thing with David is over." "Love," I scoffed. "Love forces you to meet in secret. Love implies he hides that he's married, and that your father has to promise him a VP position?" Her pupils contracted. "How do you know that?" "I know a lot more. Your future in the Sterling residences, the $20,000 watch he gave you." I glanced sideways at her bracelet. "And that Cartier he paid for with our joint account." Iris recoiled, stumbling in her high heels. "Have you been investigating me?" "Professional deformation. Market studies have to be thorough." Her expression changed from astonishment to contempt. "And what good does investigating do you? David loves me. Soon he'll divorce you, and we'll go to Singapore." Her words were like a dagger in my heart, but I forced myself to appear indifferent. "We'll see." As I left the room, my hands trembled so much I could barely hold the folder. Although in the conversation it seemed like I had won, Iris's words confirmed my suspicions. David really planned to abandon me and go to Singapore. At that moment, my phone vibrated. It was a notification from the home camera. I opened the app and saw my mother-in-law in the kitchen, pouring something into the soup. As I zoomed in, the familiar pill bottle appeared. I immediately took a screenshot and saved it. Right after, I received a call. It was David. "My mother has been admitted to the hospital." His voice sounded alarmed. "Come to Metropolitan Medical Center, right now. My mother has been admitted to the hospital." In the emergency room corridor, David, his shirt wrinkled, paced nervously. Seeing me, he ran towards me and grabbed my arm. "What the hell did you feed my mother?" I pulled away from his hand, feigning surprise. "I didn't do anything." "What's wrong with your mother?" Food poisoning. The doctor says it looks like poisoning from some chemical substance. I covered my mouth, eyes wide. This time it wasn't an act. My mother-in-law was really poisoned, but I had only swapped the Tupperware once, and that day she took the antidote. Wait. As I walked towards the emergency room, David blocked my path. She needs to rest now. You handle the admission papers. His gaze was evasive. I nodded and headed for the administration counter, but doubt grew within me. David's behavior was very strange, a mixture of anger and guilt. Pretending to handle the papers, I slipped into the doctor's office. I'm Beatrice Miller's daughter-in-law. Could you tell me how she's doing? The doctor adjusted his glasses. It's a mild organophosphate poisoning. Fortunately, her life is not in danger. The strange thing is that we detected traces of pralidoxime in her blood, the antidote. It seems she had taken it beforehand. My heart raced. And what usually causes that type of poisoning? Pesticides or insecticides? Does the patient handle those types of substances? Well, I'm not sure, but lately my mother-in-law used to prepare my lunch, and the taste was a little strange. Sometimes I felt dizzy and nauseous, but I thought it was due to stress, I said, lowering my head with a dejected look. The doctor looked at me seriously. It would be advisable for you to also have an analysis done. Organophosphate compounds can accumulate in the body. Yes, I will. Thank you, doctor. Excuse me, could you give me a copy of my mother-in-law's report? It's to add to her other medical reports. The doctor hesitated for a moment, but then photocopied several documents and handed them to me. I left the office and in a corner of the corridor quickly photographed all the pages and sent them to my lawyer. At that moment, I received a new message from Detective Morris. The attachment was a record proving that my mother-in-law's cousin, the head of development at the pharmaceutical company, had acquired a large quantity of experimental organophosphate compounds last month, and in the recipient section, surprisingly, was David Miller's name. My hands trembled. David was also involved in the poisoning plan. No wonder he was so nervous today. He feared his mother had mistakenly taken the poison he himself had prepared, and that the whole plan would come to light. Helen! David called me from behind. I quickly locked my phone and turned with a worried expression. I just spoke with the doctor. He says it looks like food poisoning. David's expression visibly relaxed. My mother woke up and is asking for you. My mother-in-law, lying in the hospital bed, had a bloodless face. Seeing me, her gaze sharpened. Mrs. Beatrice, do you feel better? I approached the bed and took her hand. It was damp and cold, like a reptile's. I'm not going to die, she said, pulling her hand away. Have you been eating out lately? I ignored her inquisitive question and replied, a new salad shop opened near the office. They're very healthy. Don't worry. And rest, ma'am. My mother-in-law and David exchanged a significant look. David, she cleared her throat. The doctor says my mother needs rest. I've also been very busy lately, so take a few days off and take care of her. Seeing his hypocritical face, I felt the urge to reveal everything, but at the same time thought it was a golden opportunity to gather more evidence. Of course, after all you've done for me, it's the least I can do. My kind response seemed to further awaken my mother-in-law's suspicions. David hastily said goodbye with the excuse of work. As soon as he left, I sat beside my mother-in-law's bed and began to peel an apple. Mrs. Beatrice, why do you think you got poisoned? Did you eat something spoiled? My mother-in-law closed her eyes and didn't answer. The vegetables I bought the day before yesterday must have been spoiled. Come on, come on, come on. Yes. But the doctor says organophosphate poisoning is usually from pesticides or insecticides. My mother-in-law's eyelid twitched. I continued to peel the apple. The sound of the knife against the fruit echoed in the room. Doctors nowadays don't know anything. They just scare people, she finally said. Yes, you're right, I agreed as I offered her the peeled apple. But the doctor gave me the analysis report, and it says they found traces of the antidote in your blood. How strange, right? When did you take it? My mother-in-law's hand trembled, and the apple rolled across the sheets. She began to cough violently. I brought her a glass of water and whispered in her ear, Mrs. Beatrice, How does pralidoxime taste? She stopped coughing, and her pupils contracted. She looked at me with wide, owl-like eyes. I smiled and took a step back. I'll go ask the nurse when they'll discharge you. My mother-in-law insisted on being discharged the next day. As soon as she got home, she locked herself in her room and didn't even prepare dinner. David, using the excuse of overtime, didn't return until late. In the middle of the night, I crept into my mother-in-law's room. She was sleeping soundly, probably due to the medication. I searched the room carefully, and at the bottom of the nightstand drawer, I found a medicine box. Inside were several vials with handwritten labels. I photographed all the vials. A small one, with the special label V, caught my attention. When I opened it, I found a white powder with a slight almond smell. I placed a small amount in a plastic bag I had prepared and put the vial back in its place. As I was leaving, my mother-in-law spoke in her sleep. "David, don't put too much in it." I froze, but seeing that she didn't wake up, I left in silence. I returned to my room, locked the door, and sent a message to Detective Morris. Urgent analysis of this white powder. I sat on the bed, trembling. The poisoning plan was, without a doubt, the work of mother and son. Don't put too much in it. They feared that if I died too quickly, it would raise suspicions. Then, I received a response from my lawyer. I received the hospital report. Along with the previous evidence, we can prove intentional bodily harm, but we need more financial evidence. It would be advisable to confirm if your husband's transfer to Singapore is true. I looked out the window at the apartment complex across the street. One of those lights would be Iris's home. Mother-in-law, son, and mistress. Was this perfect triangular relationship really that solid? At the hospital, when David mentioned Singapore, my mother-in-law's expression wasn't one of joy. She seemed more uneasy. I turned on my computer and began searching for information on commercial relations between Sterling Group and Singapore. 2 hours later, I straightened my back after discovering something interesting. Sterling Group had no headquarters in Singapore. Instead, it was developing a large project in Australia. David's transfer to Singapore was most likely a lie. So, what was his real plan? To escape with Iris, or was he even being deceived by her? The pieces on the board had begun to move, and I was no longer the defenseless victim. The analysis of the special product is ready. Detective Morris's voice sounded grave on the other end of the phone. It's not a simple pesticide. It's an experimental compound that slowly destroys the nervous system, causing multi-organ failure that appears to be natural death. How long does it take to take effect? It depends on the dose, but between 3 and 6 months, symptoms gradually appear like a chronic illness, so it's difficult for doctors to suspect poisoning. This compound is still in the animal experimentation phase, and its use in humans is prohibited. Is it the same one my mother-in-law's cousin manufactured? The one David received? Exactly. And David's transfer to Singapore was a lie. The Sterling Group has no business in Singapore. Instead, President Sterling has a secret daughter in Australia, and it seems he decided to leave her the management of the Melbourne headquarters. The detective's words were like daggers. I bit my lip until I tasted blood. So that was it. Iris never intended to go to Singapore with David. She had her own plan. And David was nothing more than a pawn. Keep investigating, especially the call records between Iris and her father. After hanging up, I heard the sound of dishes in the kitchen. My mother-in-law had been preparing breakfast since she returned from the hospital. Although she outwardly acted normally, she couldn't hide her nervousness when we were alone. I took a deep breath and entered the kitchen. She had her back to me, frying an egg. On the counter was the familiar reddish Tupperware. "Good morning, Mrs. Beatrice," I said loudly. Her shoulders tensed. "You startled me. You came in without making a sound. What were you thinking about so deeply?" I asked, approaching her with a smile and picking up the Tupperware. "Today, I will also eat with great pleasure." My mother-in-law stared fixedly at the container in my hand. "With so much work, don't skip meals." "Of course not. I'll eat everything." Chewing every bite thoroughly, I said, emphasizing the last words and looking directly into her eyes. My mother-in-law's hands began to tremble slightly. "Mrs. Beatrice, I whispered in her ear. Do you know the after effects of organophosphate poisoning? First, the muscles contract, then breathing paralyzes, and finally one dies suffocated in terrible agony. Clank, the spatula my mother-in-law was holding, fell to the floor. Her face turned as pale as wax, and she was speechless. Only her lips trembled. I picked up the spatula and handed it to her. Be careful, Mrs. Beatrice. At your age, it's normal for your hands to shake. Having said that, I turned with the Tupperware. As soon as I left the house, the phone rang. It was David. Can we meet for a moment at noon? I have something important to tell you. Sitting in the restaurant, David was impeccably dressed, but he couldn't hide the deep, dark circles under his eyes. What's wrong? I asked, indifferently. As I ordered a lemonade, he took an envelope from his briefcase and slid it towards me. A divorce settlement. I read it slowly. The conditions were ridiculous. The money and the house for him. For me, an old 5-year, old car and $100,000 in compensatory alimony. Are you serious? I asked with a calm that surprised even myself. Closing the document, David avoided my gaze. They're pressuring me from Singapore. I want to resolve this quickly. Resolve what? Our marriage or my life? His pupils contracted. What are you talking about? Your mother has been putting poison in my food for over half a year. And you knew, didn't you? I shot back bluntly. I clearly saw his face turn white. If I continued to take that poison, my body would slowly paralyze until it looked like I had died of an illness. How thoughtful. David's hand trembled, spilling his coffee cup. I don't know anything. Of course you knew, I lowered my voice. You siphoned $240,000 from our joint account and were preparing to run off with Iris. But do you know something? She has no intention of going to Singapore with you. David abruptly raised his head. His eyes reflected shock and terror. You've been investigating me. Professional defamation. I leaned back in my chair. Oh, and the antidote your mother took? You're the one who gave it to her, weren't you? What a good son. You even prepare her the antidote. David was breathing with difficulty. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Helen, listen to me, I don't need to hear anything. I handed him back the divorce settlement. I'm not signing this. If you want a divorce, divide the assets equally, as it should be. Otherwise, I smiled, I'll have no choice but to present the laboratory reports and camera footage I've been saving at the police station. His face lost all color. I have enough evidence to send both you and your mother to prison. I stood up and picked up my bag. I'll give you 3 days to think about it. The new agreement must state that the house is mine and that you return all the money you siphoned off. Otherwise, I whispered in his ear, the next time your mother gets poisoned, it won't be so light. As I left the restaurant, the sun blinded me. My hands trembled, but not from fear, but from exhilaration. Now it was their turn to taste terror. On the day of the second meeting with Sterling Group, Iris appeared in a striking red suit. Director Helen, I heard your mother-in-law was hospitalized. At her age, you must be very worried, she said with false compassion before starting. I smiled as I turned on my laptop. Thank you for your concern. She's already been discharged. By the way, Miss Sterling, you seem very interested in the health of the elderly. Do you have any sick relatives at home? Her smile froze. My father is perfectly healthy. Oh, really? I had the idea that last year he had a stent placed in Australia. I'm glad he recovered well. Her pupils contracted. How do you know that? Market research, I said as if nothing were amiss. Oh, and how's the Australia headquarters doing? I heard it's now managed by someone else. Iris's face turned ashen. When the meeting began, I presented a completely new proposal, focused on ingredient safety and proven efficacy. Our research shows that Sterling Group's main clientele prefers a traditional and reliable brand image over risky innovations. Iris tried to refute me, but the data was undeniable. Therefore, we propose using the support of medical experts, particularly someone like Dr. Smith, an authority in dermatology in Australia. Iris jumped. Australia? Why specifically Australia? Because Dr. Smith has great prestige in the Asia-Pacific region. And, I paused, Given that the Sterling Group is preparing its entry into the Australian market, this collaboration could generate great synergies, don't you think? The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Iris. It looked like she had been slapped. That. We'll have to discuss it further. She barely managed to articulate before ending the meeting. How the hell did you know about the Sterling Group's plans in Australia? Claire asked me as soon as we got back to the office. Closing the door, I turned on the computer and showed her some documents. Sterling Group secretly acquired a small company in Australia last month. It's their springboard to enter the Oceania market. The curious thing is that the project manager is not Iris, but the president's secret daughter. Claire's eyes widened in astonishment. I can't believe it. No wonder she was so nervous. And that's not all. Iris has tried to get involved in the project, but her father categorically rejected her. Where do you get all this internal information? Claire looked at me with admiration. I just smiled. Detective Morris's skill exceeded all expectations. Now, we follow the plan. The more nervous Iris gets, the more mistakes she'll make, and we can't afford to waste them. That night, when I arrived home, a strange silence reigned. My mother-in-law had left a note saying she was going to visit her cousin, and David hadn't returned. I immediately sent a message to the detective. Follow Beatrice Miller. She went to visit her cousin at the pharmaceutical company. I searched my mother-in-law's room again. The medicine box had disappeared, but the murder diary was still there. On the last page, a scribbled note, "Can't trust David. Must prepare Plan B, Plan B." I photographed the page and left the notebook in its place. Then, I saw an envelope peeking out from under the mattress. Inside was a recent photo of David and Iris and a copy of a $50,000 check issued by the Sterling Group in David's name. A bribe. I photographed this evidence as well. David had not only betrayed me, but he had also accepted money from Iris's family. My cards were getting stronger and stronger. Then I received a call from the detective. Beatrice Miller went to Astra Labs, but didn't meet with her cousin, but with another man. In the photo, a middle-aged man in a white coat handed my mother-in-law a small vial. It was identical to the one I had seen in her room. Investigate who this man is. After hanging up, I looked out the window. Dusk was falling. What would my mother-in-law's plan B be? A more potent poison or a more drastic method? The doorbell rang. It was David. He looked more dejected than he had that morning and carried a briefcase. "Come in. Have you made a decision?" He nodded and handed me the briefcase. "The money I took. I'll return it in installments. For now, here's $50,000. Inside the envelope was a bank card and a new divorce settlement. The conditions were much better, but they weren't enough. It's not enough. I want you to return everything at once. I don't have that much money right now. And the $50,000 Iris's father gave you?" David froze as if struck by lightning. "I know much more than you imagine. Do you want to know who your mother met today at the pharmaceutical company, or what that Plan B she has written in her diary is?" David's hands began to tremble. Plan B. At that moment, his phone rang. Seeing the screen, his face went white as paper. "It's your mother. Answer on speakerphone." He hesitated a moment and pressed the call button. "David, where are you?" His mother's voice sounded urgent. I'm home. Come to my cousin's pharmaceutical company right now. It's urgent. Bring my passport and all the cash we have. We might have to leave for a while." David's eyes widened. "What are you saying? Don't ask questions and come quickly." The call ended. David stood stunned. "Looks like Plan B was escape," I said, setting down my glass of wine. He turned to me with terror painted in his eyes. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything. I was at the office all day. But why is your mother in such a hurry?" "I have to go." "As you wish." I picked up my briefcase. "But I warn you, if you try to escape, I'll call the police immediately. I've backed up the evidence in several places." His face contorted. "What do you want?" "Justice," I said coldly. "Or, to be more exact, revenge." He stared at me for a moment, and then ran for the door. I peeked out the window and saw his car disappear. Then I called the detective. "They're trying to escape. Monitor Astra Labs." I turned on my computer. A map of the area appeared on the screen. The tracker the detective was following in real time showed David's car heading there. I opened a folder I had prepared. It contained complaints for the police, the FDA, and the press, along with all the evidence files. The mouse cursor hovered over the send button. A single click, and everything would have been over, but I didn't click. It wasn't time yet. I wanted to see with my own eyes how they destroyed each other, how the world they had built on lies and murder crumbled. Then, I received a new message from the detective. A Jeep with a temporary license plate is waiting at the back door of the pharmaceutical company. Looks like a getaway vehicle. Respond by calling the police for theft of experimental pharmaceutical products. I shut down my computer and grabbed my car keys. The time had come to witness in person how that hateful mother and son pair would betray each other when the police broke in. The industrial area was eerie at night. I stood in front of a store across the street and breathed the cold air. Police will arrive in 5 minutes, I read in a message from the detective. In the distance, I began to hear the sound of sirens. At that instant, the headlights of the Jeep at the back door flickered on. They were trying to escape. Just as the car started to move, 3 police cars appeared out of nowhere, blocking its path. The emergency lights illuminated the area as if it were day. The Jeep braked hard with a screech of tires. The factory door opened, and my mother-in-law ran out with a small bag in her hand. Her hair disheveled, her figure under the lights looked like a pale ghost. Seeing the police, she tried to re-enter, but 2 officers intercepted her. "Get out now. Get out now." At that moment, David ran out through the main door. Seeing the police and his mother, he froze and then tried to flee in the opposite direction. "David!" I shouted his name without realizing it. He turned to me. Despite the distance and the flashing lights, his gaze fixed on mine. In his eyes, there was shock and hatred. He was finally caught. As they handcuffed him, he kept pointing at his mother and yelling something at her. My mother-in-law, as they led her to the patrol car, suddenly broke free and lunged at David. "Ungrateful! It's all your fault!" she screamed hysterically. "I bought the poison. I planned everything. He has nothing to do with it." David's face crumpled. "Liar! It was your idea." "Shut up," my mother-in-law screamed. "Officers, I have proof. In my son's account, there's a money transfer from Iris Sterling." The police exchanged a look and put them in different cars. Just as my mother-in-law was getting into the car, her bag fell. A glass vial rolled and shattered against the cement. A colorless liquid splashed everywhere, and a few drops stained the hem of her pants. Suddenly, her eyes widened, and she let out a scream that didn't sound human. "My leg? I can't feel my leg." The scene descended into chaos. "The antidote? I need the antidote." Her voice faded. From my car, I watched the scene, my knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. What perfect irony. My mother-in-law, a victim of her own poison. Karma, in the end, always comes. I photographed with my phone as the police collected the glass shards in an evidence bag. Then I received a call from an unknown number. "Mrs. Helen, I am the chief inspector of the city police department. Your husband and your mother-in-law. Could you come to Metropolitan Medical Center?" In the emergency room corridor, the inspector explained to me that my mother-in-law was in critical condition and that David was being interrogated. "Your husband stated that you were already aware of your mother-in-law's actions." I nodded and handed him a USB drive I had prepared. "Here is all the evidence I've gathered over months. Camera videos, lab reports, and a recording of the conversation between my husband and my mother-in-law shortly before today's incident. Why didn't you report it sooner?" I needed irrefutable evidence, and after all, she was my mother-in-law. My answer seemed to soften the inspector. He took me to a small room. During the interrogation, I told him everything I knew. In the end, the inspector allowed me to see David for 5 minutes in a small room, handcuffed to the rail of a gurney. David, seeing me, pleaded, "Helen, help me. Tell the police what I tell you. Tell them I knew nothing about the poisoning plan." I looked at him. The man I once loved to death now begged like a pathetic dog. "Why should I help you?" His face contorted. "You set us up. You're the ones who set the trap." That woman, my mother blamed me for everything. She declared I was the mastermind behind it all. Wasn't she the mother you loved so much? the one you were willing to kill me for. David lowered his head. I regret it. Oh, really? It's too late. Oh, does Iris know you've been arrested? He abruptly raised his head. Don't tell her. Why? Wasn't your love true? Oh, I forgot. She had no intention of going to Singapore with you. David's expression was as if he had been stabbed. Goodbye, David. Enjoy your stay in prison. When I turned, he yelled at my back. We were husband and wife. You can't do this to me. I stopped at the door and, without turning, said, From the moment you decided to kill me, we stopped being that. The case was resolved quickly. My mother-in-law and David were charged with attempted murder. In the divorce proceedings, I recovered all our assets and received substantial compensation for moral damages. Iris fled to Australia as soon as she found out, and her father, it seems, canceled all her credit cards. My mother-in-law's cousin, the one from the pharmaceutical company, was also arrested. He stated that my mother-in-law had recently asked him for a much larger quantity of poison than usual and had told him that she had to finish everything before the end of the month. If their plan hadn't gone wrong, I wouldn't have survived that weekend. Everything was over. I was finally safe. But why did I feel this emptiness in my heart? At the company, they organized a big celebration party for me. The project with Sterling Group was a resounding success, and I was promoted to Vice President of Marketing. Vice President, you're amazing, Claire toasted me. But I didn't taste the champagne. After the party, I returned home alone. Now, this house was entirely mine. In the darkness, I poured myself a whiskey. Then, I received a message from my mother. Daughter, congratulations on the promotion. I sent you some money to buy something nice. Without replying, I returned the transfer. I couldn't forget her voice 6 months before, telling me to endure and carry on with my life. I received a call from an unknown number. Mrs. Helen, I am President Sterling of the Sterling Group. Iris's father apologized for his daughter's behavior and told me he wanted to help me. He gave me all the evidence of the dealings between Iris and David, and even offered me the position of director of the Singapore headquarters. The conditions were exceptional. An annual salary of $300,000 plus bonuses. For now, I left the offer pending. Nothing in this world comes for free. A few days later, I received a letter from David. Helen, I warn you. Iris has returned to the States. Be careful with President Sterling. He is much more dangerous than you think. Come see me on the next visit. I'll tell you everything. Through the detective, I confirmed that Iris had entered the country a week ago with a passport under another name. President Sterling had lied to me. And that wasn't all. I learned that a senior director of the Sterling Group had visited my mother-in-law in prison. The revenge I knew had ended, but behind the scenes, a new game was germinating, and I was at the center of it. Finally, I went to the prison. Whatever information David had, I desperately needed it. The air in the visiting room was heavy. Shortly after, an emaciated David entered. President Sterling visited you, didn't he? He offered you the Singapore position. I was surprised, but I didn't show it. It's a trap. Don't accept it for anything in the world. Will it be worse than the trap you set for me? I made mistakes, but this is different. My mother's and Iris's plan was conceived from the beginning by President Sterling. With trembling hands, he took out a small hidden photo and handed it to me. Look at this. On the back, there's a Swiss bank account number. The money there is all yours. It's my compensation. In the photo, my mother-in-law and Iris were talking to a man in front of Astra Labs 6 months ago. On the back, next to the account number, a small note. LS-804, experimental data. Certificate of destruction. Okay. Olwitson's 4-Re, a secret project of Sterling's pharmaceutical company. A neurotoxin disguised as a cancer treatment. It slowly destroys memory, making it look like a natural death. I felt my blood run cold. President Sterling's target wasn't me. It was my mother. She knew too many of the group's secrets. He wanted to use your hand to eliminate her. His words fit all the pieces of the puzzle together. My mother-in-law's plan was, in reality, part of a much larger trap set by the president to get rid of her. That account number is also the password to my mother's safe. Inside there will be more evidence, he said, gripping my hand for the last time. Helen, be careful. Iris is back. The detective's additional investigation confirmed everything. LS 804 existed. There was even a death in clinical trials 3 years ago, but it was covered up, and my mother-in-law had been the medical consultant for that project. I was in the middle of a gigantic conspiracy, but I was no longer afraid. A few days later, I received a gift from Iris, a diamond necklace, identical to the one her father had given me, but this one had a hidden microphone. Little sister, do you like the gift? We need to talk about my father. She summoned me to an isolated farmhouse. I prepared everything, a recorder, a personal defense weapon, and real-time support from the detectives team. At the farmhouse, a crazed Iris awaited me, and President Sterling observing everything. They intended to inject me with LS 804 to erase my memories and turn me into their puppet. You were born with a genetic defect in our family. One injection, and you'll forget all the pain. You'll be a new person, Iris said, approaching with a syringe and a demented laugh. Exactly at that moment, the journalists and police I had alerted burst in, and behind them was my mother. President Sterling, 28 years ago, you stole my daughter. Today, all your crimes will come to light. My mother had spent decades investigating the president's dirty secrets, preparing her revenge. Everything was over. President Sterling and Iris were arrested, and Sterling Group plummeted with the LS 804 scandal. My mother-in-law would spend the rest of her life in the prison infirmary, and David, after confessing everything, was sentenced to a long term. I, freed from the shadow of the Sterling family, founded my own consultancy. I began helping other companies as an expert in recognizing traps in the darkness, working with my mother, as if to recover 28 lost years. As every week, on a sunny day, standing by the window, I contemplated the city landscape. On my desk, a second letter from David. I didn't open it. Instead, I stamped it "Return to Sender" and put it in the mailbox. There are pasts that are not worth dwelling on. The sun warmed my face with its heat. The long revenge was over, and finally, my new life was beginning.